Kindness in a language he thought he knew. Have you ever met someone who spoke your language, but somehow it felt like they were speaking to your heart instead? That's what happened to John Miller, a retired English teacher from North Carolina. 65 years old, white hair, calm blue eyes, and a face softened by time and quiet regret. For nearly 40 years, John taught English. He corrected essays, graded grammar, polished accents, and shaped how students used their words. To him, English wasn't just a language. It was a craft, something to be perfected, sharpened, measured. He thought he understood it better than anyone. But one morning, high above the Pacific Ocean, John began to wonder if he'd misunderstood his own life's work. He wasn't even supposed to be on that flight. The trip was meant for his late wife, Marjorie. She had always dreamed of visiting Cebu, the ocean, the churches, the people she saw in travel magazines. But after she passed, John couldn't bring himself to go, not until he found a small folded note inside one of her books. It read, "One day, you'll hear kindness in a language you thought you already knew." He didn't understand it at first. Kindness in a language he already knew? What did that even mean? He tucked the note away, but the words wouldn't leave him. Years passed, until one day, when loneliness grew louder than grief, he booked a one-way ticket to Manila. The moment he stepped off the plane, the humidity wrapped around him like a blanket. Thick, heavy, uninvited, but oddly comforting. Then came the voices. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Philippines." The airport staff smiled as they spoke. Their English was light and musical, filled with warmth. It wasn't perfect by textbook standards, but it didn't need to be. It felt perfect. Outside, the taxi driver greeted him with a grin. "Sir, first time here?" "Yes," John said. "Ah," the driver replied. "You'll like it here. We speak your language, but we mean it." John didn't know how to answer. He just watched the city blur past. Jeepneys painted with words like faith, blessed, God's love. English was everywhere, not stiff or foreign, but alive. It wasn't being used, it was being lived. That night, he checked into a small inn run by a local family. The woman at the front desk greeted him. "Good evening, Sir John. I hope you had a smooth flight." Her tone caught him off guard. Not formal, not rehearsed. She meant it. The words carried care, not courtesy. Later, as he unpacked, the TV hummed with an English news broadcast. The anchor's English was flawless, yet soft, confident without being cold. He wrote in his notebook, "It's not the accent, it's the intention." The next morning, John wandered through the neighborhood. Children in uniforms laughed and chased basketballs, switching between Tagalog and English without hesitation. "Kuya, come on, let's play," one shouted. Their mix of languages was effortless, musical. They weren't learning English, they were living it. He stopped at a small cafe, where a young waitress named Liza served him coffee. "Black, no sugar, right?" she said with a grin. "You look like someone who enjoys things simple." John chuckled. "You guessed right." "Just from talking to people," she said, shrugging. "We use English so we can talk to anyone." Something stirred in him. Back home, English had become a wall, about correctness, pride, identity. But here, it was a bridge. Before he left, Liza said, "Sir John, you teach English, right? Then you'll see. Here, English is how we show respect, not how we show off." That line echoed in his head all day. Respect, not show off. That night, as he sat by his window overlooking the city lights, he heard faint church bells and laughter from the street below. He whispered to himself, maybe this is the real English she meant. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a teacher correcting others. He felt like a student again, ready to listen. The next morning, he woke to children's voices outside. At first, he thought it was a prayer, but as he listened closer, he realized they were reciting English. "Good morning, teacher. We are happy to see you today." Their tone wasn't robotic, like in the American classrooms he knew. There was joy, rhythm, sincerity. They meant what they said. The sound pulled him out of his room and down the narrow street until he found a small public school painted in faded blues and yellows. A woman by the gate, neat hair, gentle smile, asked, "Good morning, sir. Are you visiting?" "Yes," he said softly. "I used to teach English. I just heard your students." Her eyes lit up. "Ah, then come inside. They'll be happy to meet an American teacher." Within minutes, John was standing in front of 20 bright-eyed children. Their desks were worn but clean, their notebooks full of doodles. "Children," the teacher said, "we have a special visitor, Mr. John from America." The class clapped, and a small boy raised his hand. "Sir John, do you know Taylor Swift?" Laughter filled the room. As the class went on, John noticed something extraordinary. The children spoke English with emotion. Not perfect, not polished, but real. When a girl read aloud from a worn storybook, her voice trembled at the sad part. She wasn't performing, she was feeling. After class, the teacher, Mrs. Reyes, invited him for coffee in the small canteen behind the school. The tin roof rattled in the wind. She asked, "So, Sir John, what do you think of our English?" He looked at her, smiling. "It's the most beautiful English I've ever heard." Mrs. Reyes laughed softly. "Maybe because here, English isn't something we own. It's something we share." John nodded. He finally understood his wife's note. Kindness in a language he thought he already knew. And for the first time in his life, he realized language doesn't belong to those who master it. It belongs to those who use it with love. "I've taught English for 30 years, Mrs. Reyes said, stirring her coffee slowly, her eyes soft with memory. "But here," she smiled, "we don't just teach grammar. We teach grace." "Grace?" John asked, leaning forward. "Yes," she nodded. "The children learn English through kindness. Every sentence they speak must have respect. Good morning. Thank you. God bless. It's not just language. It's our nature. That's why when we speak English, we still sound Filipino." John sat back, quiet, letting her words settle. Grace, not grammar. He had never heard anyone put it that way. Before he left, the children came running up to him, one by one, their small hands reaching out. "Thank you, Sir John. Please come again," they said, their voices bright, their smiles unguarded. Every "thank you" held more sincerity than any polished speech he had ever heard. As he walked away, John realized something simple but profound. English in the Philippines wasn't just taught, it was passed down, like a family heirloom, spoken with care, nurtured with faith. That evening, Mrs. Reyes invited him to Sunday Mass at a nearby church. John hesitated. He hadn't stepped inside one since Marjorie's funeral. But something about her tone, gentle and unassuming, made him say yes. The church was old, Spanish style, with walls that had held centuries of prayer. But it wasn't the architecture that struck him. It was the sound. The choir sang hymns in a blend of Tagalog and English, their voices weaving together so seamlessly that it was hard to tell where one language ended and the other began. During the homily, the priest, a man with warm eyes and a calm, booming voice, said, "When we speak to each other in English, we are not copying the world. We are connecting with it, but we never lose who we are." Those words pierced John more deeply than he expected. After Mass, a group of older women gathered around him, smiling with curiosity. "Sir, you're from America?" one asked. He nodded. "Oh, that's nice," another said with a playful grin. "But you must admit, our English sounds better." The women laughed. John laughed too. Honestly, he said, it might just be. Their faces lit up with pride, as though they had been waiting years for someone to say it. Outside, John sat on a bench beneath the fading light. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the street. "Pass the ball. Wait, Lang. Here." Tagalog and English danced together, not competing, but completing each other. He thought about home, where people argued about accents and grammar and political correctness. Here, people just spoke, to love, to comfort, to laugh. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "They speak English like it still means something." Then he paused and added another line. Maybe English didn't survive in America. Maybe it survived through the Filipinos. The thought startled him. It felt like a confession he hadn't meant to make. But deep down, he knew it was true. For the first time, the man who once corrected students for misplaced commas realized that meaning mattered more than mechanics. English hadn't just survived here. It had evolved. Softer, kinder, more human. He looked out his window. Vendors were packing up their stalls, calling out prices in cheerful English, mixed with slang. A tricycle driver waved and shouted, "Thank you, boss," as he drove off into the night. The city pulsed with a language that didn't belong to anyone, and yet belonged to everyone here. John smiled quietly. For decades, he had taught people how to speak English. But now, in this faraway land, he was learning how to feel it. And for the first time in years, he whispered to the night, "I think I finally understand what she meant." A week passed, and half of his leather notebook was already filled. Phrases, faces, and bits of laughter he'd heard drifting from the streets below. He didn't quite know why he was writing so much, only that something about this place made him want to remember. English here carried life, empathy, and something he hadn't heard in America for a long time: sincerity. One morning, he met Armin, a young man in his 20s who worked as a call center trainer in Makati. Mrs. Reyes had introduced them online, and they decided to meet at a cafe. Armin's handshake was firm, his English crisp and confident, but his eyes held warmth, not pride. "So, Sir John," Armin began, "I train young Filipinos to speak English for international clients. Most of them work nights, serving people they'll never meet, mostly Americans." John nodded, intrigued. "I've heard about your call centers, but I never realized how big they are here." Armin smiled. "It's more than work. It's survival, but also connection. We don't just fix problems or sell things. Sometimes we calm people down when they're angry. Sometimes we comfort them when they're lonely." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You'd be surprised, sir. Some of my agents have helped Americans crying alone at 3 a.m. on the other side of the world." John's eyebrows rose. "Through a headset?" "Yes," Armand said softly. "Through words. That's the Filipino way. We don't just speak English to communicate, we speak it to care." John sat back in silence. It wasn't a boast. It was truth. He thought of Marjorie again, how she used to say kindness was its own language. And now, in this noisy Makati cafe, he could almost hear her voice through the laughter around him. That night, Armand brought him to the call center floor, a vast sea of cubicles glowing under pale light. Hundreds of young voices spoke gently into microphones. The air buzzed softly, like a heartbeat. But it wasn't noise, it was empathy. He watched a young woman, maybe 22, guiding an elderly American through resetting his computer. "It's okay, sir," she said kindly. "Take your time. You're doing great." Period. Her accent was Filipino, her English simple, but her care was unmistakable. When the call ended, she smiled. "He reminds me of my Lolo," she said. "He just needed someone to talk to." John felt his throat tighten. This was the English he didn't recognize anymore back home. Not the corporate language, not the political shouting. This was real English, words carrying compassion across oceans. Before he left, Armand said something that stayed with him. "Maybe Americans created English, but here we kept its soul alive." That sentence echoed in John's chest for days. A few days later, he traveled south to Batangas, where Mrs. Reyes's cousin owned a small homestay near the countryside. The moment he arrived, laughter greeted him. Children ran barefoot, rice cooked over firewood, and the air smelled of salt and soil. There was no Wi-Fi, no city noise, just people talking, smiling, living. Yet even here, English floated through the air like a gentle melody. A grandmother scolded a child in Tagalog, then added in English, "Next time, be careful, okay?" The boy nodded earnestly. That evening, John joined the family for dinner. They sat on the bamboo floor, passing food and stories around. The father insisted he eat first. "You are our guest, Sir John," he said. "It's our way." The conversation flowed easily between English and Tagalog, laughter breaking every few minutes. They asked him about America, about the snow, about life after retirement. And for once, John didn't correct a single word. He just listened, because somehow, in this quiet countryside, surrounded by people who spoke his language differently, he felt more understood than he ever had before. John spoke softly, feeling more listened to than he had in years. The grandmother, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked at him for a moment before saying something that froze him. "You know, Sir John," she began, "when my son went to work in the Middle East, he didn't know much Arabic. But he said his English helped him make friends. He told me, 'Nan, English saved me from loneliness.'" Her voice cracked slightly. "That's why we teach our children to speak it with heart, because one day they'll need it, not to show they are smart, but to show they care." John swallowed hard. The candlelight flickered against the walls as her words sank deep. It wasn't just a language here. It was a lifeline, a bridge between islands, between families separated by oceans, between hearts that still longed for home. After dinner, he stepped outside. The countryside was wrapped in stillness, broken only by crickets and the faint laughter of children somewhere beyond the rice fields. The stars above were brighter than he remembered. He thought about all the Filipinos working overseas, nurses, teachers, caregivers, people using English not to impress, but to comfort, to pray with strangers, to speak hope into the loneliness of others. They didn't just keep English alive, he whispered to himself. They made it sacred. Back in his room, John opened his notebook and wrote slowly. "In America, we speak English to be understood. In the Philippines, they speak it to understand others." He stared at the words, feeling an ache in his chest, the kind that comes when you finally see what you've missed all your life. He reached for the small photo of his late wife, tucked inside the back page. For the first time since she passed, he smiled without sadness. "You were right," he whispered. "I finally heard the kindness you were talking about." The next morning, John joined the children as they did their English homework. One girl, maybe 9 years old, stood up shyly to read her short essay aloud. "English is not just grammar," she said carefully. "It is how we say 'I love you' to the world." John felt tears rise behind his glasses. He wrote a single word in his notebook: truth. As the sun rose over the rice fields, painting everything gold, John realized something extraordinary. Maybe the world hadn't lost English after all. Maybe it had simply moved across the ocean to a place where it could breathe again. And maybe that place was here. 3 weeks had passed since he arrived in the Philippines. Every day had been a quiet revelation, a rediscovery of something America had long forgotten. That morning, he sat on the small veranda of the Batangas homestay, sipping coffee as the mist lifted over the fields. His notebook was half full now. Scattered sentences, sketches of faces, fragments of conversations. But one line stood out above all the rest. "They speak English like they still believe in it." He read the sentence over and over until it felt carved into him. In the distance, children's voices rose in chorus, reciting an English poem. The sound was bright, hopeful, alive. That's when it struck him. Maybe the world needed to hear this. A few days later, back in Manila, Mrs. Reyes invited him to give a short talk at a local university. John hadn't stood before a classroom in over a decade, but as he stepped up to the podium, surrounded by young faces full of energy, something inside him came alive again. "Good morning, Sir John," the students called out in cheerful unison. He smiled. "Good morning." He began softly, his voice steady but warm. "I've taught English for 40 years, he said. "I came here expecting to see how well you've learned it. But instead, I discovered how much we Americans have forgotten." The room fell silent. "In the States," he continued, "English has become transactional. We use it to sell, to argue, to divide. But here, you use it to connect, to comfort, to show respect." He paused, letting the quiet settle around his words. "I used to think perfect English was about pronunciation and grammar. But now I see it's about something deeper, meaning, kindness." A young man raised his hand. "Sir John," he asked timidly, "are you saying Filipinos speak better English than Americans?" John smiled gently. "No," he said, "I'm saying Filipinos speak truer English. The kind that listens before it speaks. The kind that remembers that words are meant to bring people together, not tear them apart." Applause filled the room, not out of flattery, but recognition. They understood. They had lived that truth without realizing it. After the talk, one of the professors approached him. "Sir," she said, "you should write about this. People need to hear it, especially Americans." That night, back in his hotel room, John opened his laptop and began to write. The words came like water. He titled his essay, "The Real English I Found in the Philippines." He wrote about Mrs. Reyes and her lesson of grace over grammar, about Armin, the call center trainer who taught him that English could heal across time zones, about the children who spoke it with laughter and sincerity. He wrote about how, in America, English had become cold, a tool for business, politics, pride. But here, in a country once colonized by the very language he taught, English had found new life. It had been reborn, not as a symbol of superiority, but as a vessel of warmth, respect, and faith. The irony humbled him. The student had become the teacher. Weeks later, a national education magazine invited him to write one final essay before retiring for good. He titled it, "The Language That Found Its Heart Again." He began, "If you want to know what English was meant to be, listen to a Filipino speak it. It's not about flawless grammar or perfect pronunciation. It's about sincerity, humility, and hope. They have turned English into something we Americans once had, a language of trust." He ended with this line, "Perhaps it takes losing something to truly hear it again. And perhaps the heart of English now beats in the islands of the Philippines." When the essay was published, it spread quickly. Teachers across the United States discussed it in classrooms. Journalists quoted it. Even politicians mentioned it in speeches about empathy and humility. But what mattered most were the messages that came flooding in from Filipinos around the world. One said, "Sir John, thank you for seeing us, not as perfect speakers, but as real people." Another wrote, "Now I'm proud of my accent, because it carries who we are." That one made him smile. He realized that in celebrating the Filipino way of speaking, he hadn't just praised a language, he had honored a people. Months later, back home, John returned to his small neighborhood church for Sunday service. After Mass, he lingered by the old piano and spoke with the choir director, a Filipino nurse who had moved to the States years ago. Her voice carried the same warmth he remembered from Manila. As they said goodbye, she added softly, "God bless you, Sir John." The words, simple, sincere, spoken in English, made his eyes water. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a prayer. That night, John sat by the window, the same spot where he used to sit with his wife. He opened his leather notebook one last time and wrote, "English is not dying. It's just gone home, to the hearts of people who never forgot what words are for." He closed the notebook slowly, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. Outside the world was quiet, but not empty. It was full of meaning, of sound, of connection stretching across oceans. Somewhere far away, in a classroom in Manila, or a quiet home in Batangas, someone was probably saying the same words he now whispered to himself. "Good evening. Take care. God bless." Common words, yet filled with grace. And as John drifted into sleep, he realized that this was the final lesson he had been waiting to learn. The truest form of language isn't about how it's spoken. It's about how it's felt. The Filipinos had reminded the world of that truth. And now, perhaps, millions were beginning to believe it too. Because the real English, the one that listens, forgives, and heals, never left humanity. It just found a new home, here in the islands of the Philippines.